Great.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's event, The Power of Protocol, Changing the World Through Diplomacy with Ambassador Capricia Marshall. My name is Tashi Chigel, and I'm a second-year Januarian master's student at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. I'm thrilled to be welcoming you all to tonight's discussion about a pressing topic. Thank you to tonight's co-sponsors, the International Relations Program, Tisch College, the Fletcher School, and Jumbo Vote. Don't forget to vote. Tisch College has many events with civic leaders visiting campus virtually this fall. Tomorrow, there will be a panel entitled Politics and Press in the Age of Trump with journalist David Gregory, NPR politics reporter Juana Summers, Politico co-founder John Harris, and NBC 10 political reporter Allison King. And on Thursday, we will host Catherine Gill for a conversation about her recent book, The Politics of Industry. You can find out more about these events by checking tischcollege.tufts.edu/events. For those of you zooming in tonight, there will be an opportunity to ask questions during the event. Please submit them via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Event staff will reach out to you directly for additional instructions, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. Now, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers for today's conversation. Ambassador Capricia Marshall served as White House Social Secretary to President Bill Clinton from 1997 to 2001, and United States Chief of Protocol to President Barack Obama from 2009 to 2013. In her posts, Ambassador Marshall enhanced traditional protocol methods with new tools to build relationships between dignitaries and industry leaders across the world. Ambassador Marshall and her team oversaw multiple state visits, including the G20 and G8 convenings, the Nuclear Security Summits, APEC, NATO, and Sunnylands summits. Ambassador Marshall is the president of Global Engagement Strategies, LLC, which advises international public and private clients at the nexus of business and cultural diplomacy. Her clients include Bloomberg, 3M, and other Fortune 100 companies. A first-generation American, Ambassador Marshall has brought an understanding of the importance of culture to her posts and consultations. She is currently ambassador in residence at the Adrienne Arsht Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. Her recent book, Protocol, The Power of Diplomacy and How to Make It Work for You, was published earlier this year. Joining Ambassador Marshall in today's conversation is Dean Alan Solomon, the Pierre and Pamela Omidyar Dean of Tisch College. Dean Solomon is no stranger to diplomacy, politics, and protocol himself. A lifelong activist, Dean Solomon previously served as U.S. Ambassador to Spain and Andorra under President Barack Obama. Before his diplomatic posting in Spain, Dean Solomon chaired the bipartisan board of directors of the Corporation for National and Community Service, the federal agency that oversees domestic service programs such as AmeriCorps, Learn and Serve America, VISTA, and Senior Corps. Dean Solomon's first exposure to national politics was as a Tufts undergrad in 1968, working as a page during the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Later, he served as the Democratic Party's National Finance Chair from 1997 to 1998 and played key roles in the presidential campaigns of Secretary John Kerry, Vice President Al Gore, President Bill Clinton, and former Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis. Dean Solomon has been a lifelong supporter of Tufts University, having served as a visiting instructor, parent, alumni, trustee, founding board chair, and now the Dean of Tisch College. Welcome, Ambassador Marshall and Dean Solomon, to the discussion. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tashi, and thank you for dating me that way. Welcome, Capricia. Thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to Tisch College and Tufts University. Your book is fascinating. I found it incredibly informative on subjects ranging from ways to say cheers appropriately in over 20 countries, to using soft and smart power to achieve one's goals. The book is really wonderfully useful and accessible to folks of all ages and professions. And let's launch right into our conversation so people can learn more about it. For those who haven't read the book yet or who aren't familiar with the term, explain to us what protocol is and what Whoopi Goldberg meant when she wrote on the jacket notes. Protocol is something we can all get behind to move collectively as the better human beings we long to be.
Well, first, let me say thank you so very much, my dear friend, Ambassador Solomont, for inviting me to be a part of this series. I am so honored to be here virtually at Tufts University, Tisch College specifically. I want to also thank Tashi and Jessica and Shanley for their assistance in setting up this virtual presentation. You know well, Ambassador Solomont, the difficulties that one encounters when they are serving in government, specifically when you're engaging in diplomacy in a country that can have some hurdles, like in Spain. Generally we are very close and good friends in our bilateral relationship, but certainly there are challenges that do arise. What protocol is intended to do is that we create that foundation for diplomacy. We craft out, and I think this is what Whoopi was referring to on the jacket cover. And I'm so honored that she and so many others read my book and liked it and made such just lovely comments about it. But I think that what she was leaning into was that protocol creates a plan, a path that guides all of our interactions. And in government, certainly was guiding the interactions of the president and vice president and secretaries of state at the very highest levels in every interaction that they had with their various counterparts. And we do that so intentionally with a great deal of research, a lot of preparation, because we want to avoid those pitfalls along the way. We want to strengthen our relationships. We're gearing towards creating more collaborative experiences, making sure that we are building bridges of understanding while we go about engaging with our counterparts around the world. And you can do that in your individual lives, at school, in your business engagements with your clients. It's taking the time. You know well, Ambassador Solomon, that diplomacy is a long game. And you had to invest from the moment you landed in country. You have to invest so much time in getting to know those individuals in that country and for them to get to know you. You know, who are you? You represent the United States. You're certainly the best of the best that is sent to that country. And they're curious about you. You are now charged with building those bridges of understanding. While of course, like in protocol, we are trying to persuade our counterparts to our line of thinking. But we can build those bridges of understanding everywhere. And I think that protocol is really needed today, more so than ever, because there's a lot of divisiveness, and we want to regain, if you will, the times when you served, when we talked about in a trusting way with people around the world, who we are, what we're representing, and the goals that we are ultimately trying to achieve.
We'll get into the current situation in a little bit, but you've held two fascinating jobs that most people aren't that familiar with or might have misconceptions about. Tell us what the White House Social Secretary does and how that prepared you to be the nation's chief of protocol.
Well, I was ever so lucky to have worked for two extraordinary presidents, President Clinton and President Obama. Amazing first ladies in both Hillary and Michelle, vice presidents and Vice President Gore and Biden, and the secretaries of state. I've just been incredibly blessed that way. So when I was taken on in the Clinton administration quite early, under the mentorship of Hillary Clinton, to have this extraordinary posting, the social secretary. I was almost the youngest social secretary. Bess Abel, who just recently passed away and served under President Johnson, I think beat me out by 6 months. But the position is one that I considered to be the visual communications arm of the president's agenda, of his primarily domestic policy goals, although we also worked in tandem with the State Department and with the Office of Protocol on all of our international engagements. Anything that occurred on the White House grounds, any type of event that the president was involved in, it came through the social office. We helped craft what it would look like. We would extend the invitation. So we created and broadened the circle. And you know well that President Clinton loved to have everybody in the White House. So our events were never small. They were always enormous. And then we executed them and, working tirelessly around the clock, both the Clintons, President and Mrs. Clinton, when she served as First Lady, were just constantly having people into the White House, engaging with them, both socially and on a lot of policy issues. It was an exciting job. But I have to say that while I served in it, I did keep an eye on that posting of Chief of Protocol just across Pennsylvania Avenue, because there was a specific charge in that position, and it was to engage with the foreign policy endeavors of the president. And I felt that sat a bit more well with me because of my background and my upbringing.
Well, speaking of that, in the book you say, we are all interested in origin stories. Would you share yours with us?
Oh, absolutely. I am very proudly first generation American. My mother arrived to this country very young from Guadalajara, Mexico. My father from communist Yugoslavia then at the age of 27. And quite miraculously, they met on a blind date in Cleveland, Ohio. And I'm really lucky that blind date went really well because hence I was born. We lived in my grandmother's home, and it was one half of a duplex with my cousins and my aunt and uncle living next door. In this tiny house, there were not only the cultures and tradition of Mexico and Croatia that were celebrated, but also we had relatives from Poland and Italy, and we had neighbors from Russia and Lebanon. And so, I mean, just we were like a mini UN in this house, and so many different types of food were served and different languages were spoken. It was just extraordinary. And that became a part of my core. What I loved and cherished. I loved the idea that we were celebrating difference in our home. And there were always different moments, whether or not I was going to a Croatian soccer match or I was making tamales with my grandmother in the kitchen. It was just wonderful. And so when I was given this extraordinary opportunity by President Obama, when he put my name up to the Senate for nomination, I finally was given the posting and sworn in by Secretary Clinton. I knew I'd return back to my grandmother's kitchen. There was just wonderful opportunity again to shine a bright light on the differences around the world and to bring them in, for them to get to know us, to showcase the best of America, but then also for me to travel with the president and be that bridge for him in experiencing and understanding and knowing the proper cultures of those that we were visiting.
Well, speaking of your grandmother's kitchen, let's talk about the diplomacy of food, which you write about a lot in the book. I should tell you, we've had one of the world's best known food diplomats, Chef Jose Andres, speak to us as part of this Tisch College series. And actually, he received an honorary degree from Tufts a few years ago. Tell us what your experience in terms of the connection between food and diplomacy. And if I may ask, what was the most unique dish you have eaten for your country?
Well, let me preface this with the concept of, and you alluded to it, soft power. In the Office of Protocol, we used so many soft power tools. And soft power, as opposed to hard power, which we know is war and economic sanctions, soft power was a term that was coined by Joseph Nye. And the ideal is that we want to use a variety of ways in which we can attract people into our line of thinking. And you can do that through so many different ways. You know, it was Secretary Clinton that at an assistant secretary's meeting, she gathered us and she said, I want everyone to return back to their office. I want you to really think hard on how else we can be engaging in beneficial ways with our counterparts around the world, besides what you are already doing. And I did that. We went back to the office and we sat down and we started thinking about it. And we came up with a variety of ways, but there was a luncheon that that really kind of drove this point home, where I was assisting the secretary. She was having a bilateral luncheon and we're just about to serve the meal. And when she saw what was placed in front of her, she kind of looked down, looked up at me, looked back at her plate. And I know her looks pretty well. And that was not a happy look. That was a, Capricia. And I knew what she was saying. We can do better. We were missing an extraordinary opportunity to engage with our counterpart over this meal, to tell them a little bit something about us as Americans, what's important to us, who are we? And that's a soft power tool. And so we created then the Diplomatic Culinary Initiative. And within that, we invited chefs from all over the country. We created the State Chef Corps, of which Jose Andres was one of our first.
Yep.
And they then went, when they traveled around the world, they went to our embassies, they made special meals when they traveled there. They talked about the American culinary experience. And at the State Department and at the White House then, they were creating extraordinary meals for special occasions, like the state visit. We had a semi-state visit by then Vice President Xi Jinping. And it was very important. He was about to become president of China, and Vice President Biden wanted to make sure that this visit went really well, because it was really about him getting to know us and us getting to know him. And when I remember escorting Vice President Xi up to the 8th floor and introducing him to the secretary and to the vice president. And then Secretary Clinton introduced him to our specialty chef, Ming Tsai from Boston. And you could see his eyes just light up. He was thrilled that he had this extraordinary chef creating this amazing meal, which was a real fusion of our two countries, from the ingredients to the naming of the various dishes. It was just amazing. And the two of them just started speaking in Mandarin. It was quite a moment. It was really, really wonderful. And Hillary turned to me and she said, you know, Capricia, in this like 3 minutes, you probably did more for our diplomatic relations than we could have done in 3 hours at the bilateral table. So that was just a taste of what our Diplomatic Culinary Initiative did. And to answer your last question, Alan, I traveled on an Experience America, which I can discuss a bit more in depth later, but it's one of these trips where we took the Dip Corps with us to Alaska. And while we were there, and I was in Barrow, Alaska, the most northern part of the United States, and yes, in Barrow, you can see Russia, I was asked by the mayor of Barrow to taste muktuk. I had never had muktuk before. Muktuk is whale blubber. And let me just say, there is a very pungent scent to muktuk. Immediately upon being presented this platter of whale blubber, it went up my nostrils. And I was like, oh my goodness, but I had to eat it. Of course I have to eat it. I'm being offered, I'm setting the example, and this is something that they take great pride in. So I took a nice big piece of muktuk that's pinkish and blackish in color, and there's like sort of these bubbles like tapioca pudding inside of it, and ate it. Not to say that I relished the moment, but it wasn't all that bad. A little more fishy than sushi. So it was all in honor of duty of to country and in the efforts of good diplomacy.
I'm going to see if they carry muktuk in our local supermarket. I will say, Ming Tsai had a restaurant just down the street from us here in Wellesley, and we loved there. It's in any event. But a related topic, you mentioned the term cultural IQ, sort of a theme throughout the book. So tell us what you mean by that, and what unique customs. I asked you about unique food. What unique customs did you come across in your travels that you were especially drawn to?
Well, cultural IQ is so very important. In diplomacy, you know this well. When you travel, before you actually went to post in Spain, you go through a whole series of classes and understandings of what's expected of you, what you should know, certain gestures, language, all of that to put you in the best position to conduct your job. And so I took on, when I was chief of protocol, the real duty of making sure that the president's cultural IQ was always at its top level. I wanted to make sure that he was fully prepared before the moment that he landed in a country, before he shook a hand with any leader, that he knew everything that there really was to know, the expectations of him. And also, we used this, again, as a bit of a soft power tool, because when you acknowledge someone in their country with an appropriate gesture, like in India with a namaste, it is so instantly welcoming. It's so respectful, and sometimes takes those that you're meeting aback a bit, that you took the opportunity to learn this, to know this, and to utilize it when you are in their country, on their grounds. And so that was really important for me to always hone in on that. But cultural IQ is not only about knowing the culture of others, it's also realizing and knowing your own. What am I emitting as an American? What am I saying in those first few moments when I'm meeting somebody from another country? There are different styles of people in our country, and I'm so glad that we are so diverse. But it's understanding that sort of special quality of us. What does it say? What impression are we leaving behind? And so I talk a little bit about presets, and that individuals are sort of they have presets in their cultural IQs. It comes from your background, perhaps your economic status, perhaps your religion. There's a whole host of elements that come together that we carry with us. And an individual can broaden that understanding so easily, expand their presets, change them up so that they are more effective tools. But it takes curiosity, it takes research, it takes full-on preparation in which to do that, so that you become a more well-rounded person when you are engaging with others around the world. But also, even here in the United States, we have, as you know well, diversity of political opinion, and it helps to know your own, expectations, to know what signals you are sending to others, and then also to have taken that time and preparation to get to know others who are on the other side of that discussion, of that bilateral table, in business, who is that client that is sitting across from you, whomever it might be. So cultural IQ is really super important.
So you mentioned that you took the diplomatic corps to Alaska.
Mm.
And I'm sure you didn't take them solely so that they could sample muktuk. What was the signals that you were trying to send to these were diplomats from all over the world that are opposed to the United States by taking them to Northern Alaska?
Well, we want them to fully understand, first of all, as you know, the United States is an enormous posting. It's a huge posting. And unless you're from perhaps 5 countries, your resources are limited. The ability to navigate all parts of the United States is really hard. And so this program called Experience America was actually created by my predecessor, Ambassador Nancy Brinker. I'm sure you know her well. And she impressed upon me. That was when I went around and I visited with all of my predecessors and asked them what had worked, what didn't. And this was one that she said, please try to keep it. It's so incredibly helpful, in particularly for those nations that have a hard time making it to some of these other places in the United States. And the real reason this wonderful program was so incredibly effective was we engaged with the hosts of a city. So in our first one was to Chicago, another one was to Atlanta. And as I noted, we went to Alaska, and it's not a city because we actually went all over Alaska as opposed to some of the other states that we visited. But that was important because each time they got a real taste of just the marvelous diversity of our country, the differences, from a Chicago deep dish to Atlanta, where we really sort of pulled the Band-Aid off and we talked about, some of the tougher times in our country. And we went to the Martin Luther King Library, and the wonderful, John Lewis, Congressman Lewis, spoke to them. He will be so incredibly missed. And it invited other ambassadors, like the ambassador of South Africa, to talk about his experiences having been imprisoned with Nelson Mandela, and that he had looked to the example of John Lewis. It was creating these bonds. And that's what another wonderful aspect of this program is that it was another way in which we could create bridges of understanding between us and these countries. And in Alaska, boy, we just really wanted to showcase the wonders, the beautiful environment, the opportunities, from the fishing industry to the travel industry, and certainly to the oil and gas industries. There were just so many wonderful opportunities that, but for here in Washington, D.C., they would never, ever have. So it just was one after the other. And one added benefit of what I'll say is that on these trips, we pulled them out of their own personal communities. That oftentimes the Dip Corps can become regionalized. And here on these trips, we had one occasion where the Chilean ambassador grabbed a guitar, and the backup singers were the Croatian ambassador, the Irish ambassador, the Peruvian ambassador. It was hysterical. They were singing "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" by the Stones, and you gotta love that. It was fantastic.
Let me change the subject a little. You devote a chapter in the book to negotiating while female. Tell us what you mean by that and how you addressed gender inequity in your day-to-day work at such a high level. And what's your advice to women who want to push for equity in fields that are especially male-dominated?
I will tell you, although I think that my editor would chide me a bit for admitting this, is that I really had to push my publisher to allow me to add this chapter in. They weren't quite sure, why does this fit in this book? And I said, the book, of course, is written for both men and women, but I realized that as a woman, some of these lessons and tools applied slightly differently to me as I engaged in my everyday work. You know, I make the note that I feel like women are always in a state of negotiation in absolutely everything that we do. But while I was in my position, and this is, I think, advice that I would offer to all women who are trying to, as you say, find equal footing in their positions, is to adopt an equalizing mindset. You know, to be determined at the get-go that I am here on the same ground, doing the same job, perhaps not for the same money, and that is what we are still fighting for, that pay equity, but I should be treated equally. Now, it's difficult when you are traveling the world, and there are certain expectations of women in certain regions of the world, certain attire that they request for you to don. And I adhered to that. I made sure that I was culturally sensitive, and if I was required to cover my head, I certainly did that. If there was making sure that shoulders were covered, whatever it was, I would adhere to that, because I do not want to cause any offense. But what I did not do was delegate away my position. I did not delegate away, my seat at the table. There was actually one occasion where I found out that there were, it was a gathering of chiefs of protocol. And it was only by happenstance that I was told by one of my counterparts. He said, "Are you going to the meeting?" And I said, "Well, I don't know what you're talking about." And he said, "Oh yes, we're all gathering." And I walked into the room, and it was clear that every man was invited, and there were very, very few, and there still are very few female chiefs of protocol around the world. And I wondered, why wasn't I included? And so I thought, well, maybe I just missed an email. That's very likely. And so I just took my seat. And when the host walked in and saw me there, he said, "Oh, you're here." And then it dawned on me, I was not supposed to be there because I was a woman. And I sort of cemented myself in. I said, "Oh, yes, I must have missed the notification." He goes, "Oh, no, you don't need to stay." And I said, "Oh, no, I absolutely made the time. I will be staying," because I had to be in that room. And that's a big piece of business for women, is get in the room. I talk a lot about a variety of tools that women can use, raising your cultural gender IQ, being sensitive to those issues, male, female differences. In some countries, some men won't even touch you. I talk about this one story with Mrs. Obama, Michelle Obama, when we were in Indonesia, and there was a minister who is of a certain sect that he never supposed to touch women. Well, at the greet line, when delegations meet one another, they shook hands. Well, afterwards, there was a firestorm, horrible firestorm, where they were on and on and on. "Oh my goodness, I can't believe she touched me." It was because it was live there on television. So I said, I spoke to Mrs. Obama, and she's amazing student, wants to know everything. So she never wants to deter any attention away from the duties at hand, the business at hand. She wants to be very, very aware of any cultural differences. And so I said, "Let's go to tape." And so we did. We replayed it. And sure enough, he shot his hand out first, took her hand, grabbed it, started shaking it. So, in that instance, she was absolutely right. But knowing it, if he had done this, that would have indicated, "I'm sorry, I don't shake hands with women," and you understand that. Now, I also talk a little bit about, and I want to just touch upon this very briefly, is how is subverting tokenism. And, nobody wants to be a page out of a binder. Nobody but wants to be that, "Oh, we need a woman for this session." And, and so you want to promote one another. Women want to raise each other's profiles up so that, always the hand, never the heel, raise each other up, make sure that people know that if you're an expert in a particular area, you're putting them forward so that they are on the panel, they're on the speaking program. But then, Christine Lagarde actually shared with me some moments early on in her career where, she was one of the few women in her field, and someone said, "Oh gosh, we need a woman for this, and we're going to bring it in." And she didn't shun the opportunity. She took it on, and she went in because she wowed them. She wanted to get in that room, and then once in that room, and she wowed them, she knew she was going to be invited back again and again, which she was. And what did she do? She opened the door wider, and she brought more women through it. So there's the host of different ways that you can navigate, that I talk about, how you can raise yourself up, and while negotiating, while female, get the upper hand as well. I was very lucky in that I had an amazing mentor who's a woman, in Hillary Clinton, who taught me a lot of this as I made my way through my career.
You write about mentors, and I may not get to a question about that. I wanted to ask you something a little more, immediate. You've worked for 2 different presidents, and you have observed others. To what extent does protocol and the power of diplomacy change from one administration to the next?
Well,
and there's going to be a follow-up question.
Okay. Well, protocol is designed to be standard, traditions, guidelines. And these guidelines are in place so that you know what is expected, so that you behave in accordance to a certain set of rules that are set way before you. I mean, this goes back to, when we talk about precedence order, that's the Vienna Congress. And it's all outlined, and it's to avoid. I mean, I talk about how before then there were wars to see, who would be first, second, third in line. We want to make sure to avoid that. And so it's really important to adhere to these long-standing guidelines and rules. And, from when I first was in government until I left government, every president had and did adhere to those guidelines and rules.
Well, let's talk about this presidency. You talked earlier about diplomacy being a long game with many different tools that can be used in a variety of different situations, depending on what one's goals are. How has diplomacy changed under President Trump compared to what it was in previous administrations? And what do you think the long-term impact of these changes will be?
Well, most regrettably, as I had stated at the outset, is protocol is to establish a roadmap for our leadership, so that they avoid pitfalls, and that they are not, their mission is not detracted. And it is to show that you have clear intent. And what's unfortunate is that when you ignore them, the effects can really hurt your exchange. You either look as though you have no idea what you're doing and it's chaos, or worse, that you have malintent and you meant to act in a certain way that causes embarrassment to your counterpart or belittles them. And that's certainly completely off the road of any kind of diplomatic engagement. What we're attempting to do is come closer together. We're trying to create collaborative experiences because we all have our foreign policy initiatives in moving those forward. And so when you don't follow these guidelines, it often is at your and your country's expense. For instance, when President Trump did not, when in North Korea, he saluted a military general. And I mean, first off, our president never salutes the military of any other country, let alone a country that we do not recognize and we have no diplomatic engagement with. And he's on this particular trip to try to determine how he can create a bridge, how he can create a new relationship with them. Well, no one's talking about that any longer. What they're talking about is, oh my goodness, he just saluted the military general. Why did he do that? What happened? And there's time and again, walking ahead of the Queen. Well, you're in another country. The symbolism is so strong in protocol, standing side by side, walking in that position of honor to the right of the host is symbolically important. It says so much more so oftentimes than the words at the podium can emit. And so time and again, he just missed opportunities or caused issues because he wasn't following the guidelines that had been set before him. Now, I think that we can certainly bring our country back to a time where there is a leader who understands the importance. Like I was, very fortunate to serve my two presidents Clinton and Obama, who really valued my advice, valued those memos that I gave him, valued that last minute, reminder to keep his feet on the ground, because if you showed the bottom of your shoe in certain countries, you were going to cause, great offense to the entire audience, and perhaps just lose them on that occasion. So we will come back to that type of leadership, I believe. I know Ambassador Solomon, you and I sort of see eye to eye on this issue, and I'm looking forward to those healing days. There are great people, well, Ambassador, that serve at the State Department who are tremendous foreign service officers and career civil service officers who are keeping those lines of communication, held on to and, tightly grasping to them. So we'll just, take a deep breath, and we've got a couple more weeks and we'll see where we go.
Well, I certainly agree with you. I developed enormous regard for our men and women of our foreign service. And I hope there'll be some people in the audience this evening who will be inspired by listening to you, who will think about that as a career. I know we have a lot of students from the Fletcher School, in addition to Tashi, who have tuned in. And one of the reasons why we believe so strongly in bringing people like you to campus is the power that it has and the influence it has on students when they hear an inspiring practitioner talk about something as important as our diplomacy. So there'll be somebody who's listening to you tonight who's going to become a diplomat because they listen to you. I think I want to switch now to some questions from our audience, and I have some here up on the screen. And I'm going to start with Pauline. Would you mind sharing a bit on music considerations in diplomatic protocol from your experience?
Oh my goodness. It was very similar to food and gifts. Music was another wonderful way. All elements of the arts, music and song and paintings, all of that was very much a part of our soft power toolbox. And when we hosted events, both at the State Department and were a part of assisting with those events that were at the White House, our musical selections were very well thought out. When, it was interesting is that we leaned into, at the State Department, those of a background with the country that we were hosting. So if we had someone from Italy, we were really kind of trying to pull from that community in the United States. Whereas at the White House, what we were trying to do was showcase the best of America. We wanted to showcase the best American singers and musicians and dancers, just again, time and time again, in a whole variety of genre. And so there's so many interesting opportunities within one visit to hit on two ways of creating those bridges of understanding. And it was so incredibly effective, very, very effective. I think I loved, there was, when I served as social secretary, one of my favorite visits was, well, two. One was with President Nelson Mandela, an extraordinary human being. And when we sit at the delegation table, we ask our counterparts, who would President Mandela like to hear from? And he had, his delegation members said, would it at all be possible to get Whitney Houston? And we said, you betcha. And so we went out, we told her she was unbelievably honored, rest her soul, and so excited. And when she took the stage, she was so nervous that she was sitting here singing for, President Nelson Mandela. It was just an amazing moment. And then another one was the King of Morocco. His father had just passed away. He had just taken over the reign, and President and Mrs. Clinton were hosting them. We had a huge tent on the South grounds. And so we had asked his delegation, they said he loves disco. And I said, hallelujah, I finally got to get to have Earth, Wind, and Fire play at the White House. And so we invited them in. Everybody was standing, singing, and dancing. It was a fantastic, fantastic moment.
The power of the presidency. I don't know if you were social secretary, but I remember an event on the South Lawn when a certain president that you worked for was quite a bit behind schedule and kept the guests waiting for hours.
Oh,
and
no.
Mindy Potemkin had
this was for the Holocaust. Yes, yeah. This was Ann Stock's event. Yeah.
It was pouring rain.
Oh, it was.
He had to entertain people for an hour. In any event, let me, we have a student who's ready to ask her question. Malvika, you should be coming up on the screen.
My name's Malvika, and this is my question. So diplomacy has often been used as a tool of oppression against so many communities, by the United States in particular. But you talk about how you promote mutual respect and cross-cultural understanding across communities. What's the relationship between grassroots activism and diplomacy, in your opinion?
In my what?
Sorry, in your opinion.
Oh, in my opinion, Oh, that's sort of an interesting area to dive into. I have always embraced diplomacy in a way that was about navigating the issues, the foreign policy issues, of course, that were presented to the president and the Secretary of State, and how they did that with their skill, with their knowledge, with their background. I frankly loved watching Secretary Clinton and President Obama together at the bilateral table. It was quite extraordinary. But I think that your question is a bit more complicated, and in one that in this day and age, I think is where you're leaning into a little bit more, less in the foreign policy sphere. Am I right, Malvika? I mean, tell me where you believe. I'd love to hear from you as a student. Why this was an important question for you, and where you feel that diplomacy is failing in this area.
Yeah, that's a super good question. I think what made me want to ask this question is, even locally in the United States, we often see diplomacy used as almost a distraction, or the idea of civility, and sort of finding common ground almost as a distraction from what is really happening in people's day-to-day lives, and like what certain parts of the government are doing to the American people and to people abroad. So I guess, like, from where I'm looking at it, I sometimes see that as less important, or something that maybe doesn't, or that the concept of diplomacy sort of leaves out some of the real world implications of sort of world leaders getting together and discussing these issues. So that was sort of my question.
Yeah, and I think that what we're seeing today domestically is the failings of that, where you try to mask it with a, oh, let's just all get along kind of attitude. It doesn't work. It won't tamp down the powder keg, right? Eventually it comes to the top and emotions become raw. But I think that where I lean into the elements of diplomacy is the ideal of getting to know one another and understanding. I don't have to agree with you on your side of the ledger. I don't have to, adopt your way of thinking, but at minimum, I should understand where you're coming from. And I feel like there were important elements of diplomacy that were administered, at least during the Obama administration, that characteristics that the president had that he utilized so very well, like empathy and humility. It wasn't as though he was deferring away his ground or trying to just collaborate on the set for the sake of it. He wanted to understand, why do you feel that way? What will this policy do to you and to the people of your country? I need to understand that. I need to put myself in your place, in your position. I think that made him a stronger leader. And I certainly think that helped our relationship with that country. It may not have brought us closer together for the foreign policy goal that he was trying to achieve, but it's certainly created now a bridge, a fence with that country. And I do agree with you, Malvika. I think that there is a long way that we have to go in the United States. Sometimes for the sake of diplomacy, or for the sake of winning, for the sake of just getting through, perhaps we haven't dug deep enough into what the problem is and how we can come to a better solution.
So I want to ask you a much more nuts and bolts question, if I may. We're running out of time, but this is an interesting one. In your book, you recommend voice training, and I don't think that's necessarily singing, but voice training. Do you have any recommendations on how students can improve on their voice?
I particularly lean into vocal fry. I can hear sometimes when people I can't quite imitate it all that well. I lean into that because it becomes a habit sometimes with individuals because we're sort of mimicking the way other people are speaking. I have a problem with uptick. I will, at the end of my sentence, sometimes raise my voice. In both of those instances, it conveys that you're not quite certain about what you're saying or what you're standing for, without knowing that you're doing that you have absolutely no intention of doing that. But because your voice is a certain tone, or you're stating things in a certain manner, you're unintentionally sending signals to the people that are listening to you. So you really have to think about that and the use of language and the importance of language when you're trying to, lock that client or answer that question, or, for a college interview, for a job interview. It's all so really important to be cognizant, aware. And what I did was I listened to myself after I had been interviewed. I taped myself and then I would listen back, and I was sometimes just shocked. I was like, did I say that? I can't believe I did that. And try to work on some of those habits like the uptick.
It's really great advice. Very, very, very interesting. I think we have time for one more question, and there's another student in the on-deck circle. Kayla, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, Kayla.
Hi. So I'm a freshman here at Tufts. And first of all, Ambassador, I just wanted to say thank you for speaking about what it means to be a woman in diplomacy. I really appreciated that. It's a perspective that I think isn't talked about a lot, but is so integral to what it means to be a diplomat, I think, as a woman. And my question was, I was wondering how cultural differences affect communication between diplomats, and conjunctly, how you think language affects communication.
Oh my goodness! Both. I have a chapter just on language, and certainly I talk quite a bit about cultural differences. Both of them are incredibly important when you're attempting to make that first initial connection. That establish that relationship using appropriate language. I mean, we had a problem, I will tell you, with leaders not understanding one another because we had horrific interpreters. So I'm just getting down to basics here. We at the state visit with the president of Mexico, his interpreter was so nervous that when President Calderon would say, "Oh, President Obama, I'm so very pleased to be here to discuss all of these global issues with you," his interpreter interpreted hello, hi. And it was just an awful mess. I mean, a real awful mess. So in understanding and language is so incredibly important. I'll tell you another story. This is a little bit of a side off of your question there, Kayla, but when we leaned into interpreters as well, because they were literally the voice of the president. And our Chinese interpreter, Jim Brown, was just a valuable asset because he was hearing how the Chinese were having discussions while they were interpreting. So there wasn't an interpretation going on, really. It was a discussion about an issue. And after the meeting, he would say, "Do you want to debrief me?" And we would say, "Okay." And language was becoming incredibly important in that instance because he was able then to convey to us, to President Obama, what President Hu was really saying behind the scenes in a meeting. So language in that instance, really in its most raw form in diplomacy, is incredibly important, but also just making sure that there aren't any words that you choose that would lead to confusion. That the clarity of language is so very important because you want to make sure that your intentions are not gray, but are very clear in direction. And although I would think that maybe Ambassador Solomon would say, oftentimes I wanted to be a little less clear and perhaps be a bit more vague. And that's when you're still working through, I think, the relationship itself. But understanding culture and the importance of culture, I can't emphasize it enough. It's empowering. I felt like it was a power pivot for President Obama, that it gave him that sense of knowing about his counterpart would really lift up the engagement and give him a bit of a leg up in that relationship. And so understanding your cultural differences is not only respectful and welcoming, but I think it can also be incredibly empowering.
Thank you, Capricia. This has been a real treat. It's been a personal treat for me. We go back a long time, so it's just been great to converse with you and to learn a great deal. I will say that for anybody who hasn't, the book is in back of Capricia, but it's right here. It's really, really a wonderful book, not only about diplomacy in a foreign policy sense, but diplomacy in all sorts of human interactions. And so I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I want to thank our audience and for being here as well. Stay tuned for upcoming Tisch events. We have David Gregory tomorrow evening, who's going to be moderating a panel with 3 other journalists talking about what it's like to be covering Washington these days. And this was great. So thanks you so much. Thanks everybody else, and namaste.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Solomon. I really appreciated the opportunity, and namaste to you too. And a shout out to Max Goldfield, who's there as student and junior student.
Oh, great. Good night. Good night, all.